Hello, hi everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. This is myself, Vikrant here. So we have quite good participants which have joined in. So we'll start now on the presentation. Just give me a second. I'll present my screen as well. Hope my screen is visible. Yeah. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and once again, welcome you all for the knowledge session on unlocking API excellence. That is a strategic framework for assessing API practices. To start with, we'll just have a walkthrough on the agenda. First, that we'll go through the understanding of what is an API, what should be the organization's focus areas when it comes to the API, what will be the value proposition of API benchmarking activity as such, rather what this activity means, and how do we conduct the API benchmarking exercises and some of our experiences. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Vikrant Kulkarni. I'm working as a principal consultant with Digital Fifth. Prior to this, I was working with the Ujjan Small Finance Bank as a digital banking head from the information and technology side. Prior to that, I was working with DCB Bank. There, I was responsible for handling both payment infrastructure out there, as well as the initiatives which were related to open banking. And prior to that, I was working with Yalamajili Software Exports, where I was working as a software engineer there. So, I mean, as you can see, the background of mine is largely connects to the coding practices and API practices all the way. So, have been a great journey to learn through this the evolution of APIs from the basic coding standards to now the you can say the evolved easy to use and very sharp written APIs. So the journey has been great. So I would also like to keep on sharing my experiences during the period. I'm also combining with me Sumit from our team. So Sumit would just request you to introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Sumit. So I have been associated with the Digital Fifth from the last 1 year. Within this organization, I have learned I have done multiple projects, like two of which on the API led itself. One I have worked with the leading PSU bank, where we have benchmarked the whole API and recommended some development within their developer portal. Apart from that, I have also worked with the international bank, where we have understand their cross-borders APIs and build some use cases over it. Apart from that, I have also worked with one of the leading accounting software platform where we are helping them into the MSME lending process. Since the last 1 year, it has been a great learning for me, and I wanted to share the same with this whole knowledge session. Thank you. Yeah, Vikrant can take over from here.
Yeah, thanks, Sumit. Thanks for the introduction. I would just introduce, our company, that is the Digital Fifth. So as many of the participant I can see have been through with us through multiple engagements from the Bharat Fintech Summit or through some of our training sessions, etc. So could see the known names and faces out there. Yeah, we are Digital Fifth. We are a 7-year-old digital consultancy, digital finance consulting firm, and we largely operate into the space of BFSI sector, which is largely into the digital. From the services perspective, we have been working on the digital advisory services. Open banking advisory has been one of the our core practice as well. Along with that, we have worked with fintechs and startup advisory services, technical due diligence, which again largely connects to the technologies behind the systems which we work with, as well as security compliance services, our specially practice which we run, which is very specific to the compliances as well as the security standards to be followed along with that. Digital research and content management is another part of the services that we run upon. So from the customer side, we have been working with the large fintechs or enablers, banks, embedded finance products, international banks as well. And for the training as well, we have been working with multiple clients and NBFCs, investors, and the core solution provider systems. I have talked about it, so will not spend much of the time, but just give you a perspective on the API services. On the API specifically, we have been working with the clients on the, as Sumit also was mentioning, on the API benchmarking as well as the gap assessment for few of the clients. I mean, we have got the industry experience from the developing the neobank, supporting and advising to develop a neobank, as well as digital bank strategies. API management and technology consulting services, as well as in the embedded finance practices, as you all may be aware as well, that API plays a very important role. So those are the specific API services apart from what we discussed in the prior slide. So from the engagement perspective, we have been experienced the both of the side. So from the provider side, as I mentioned earlier, I used to work with the DCB bank. So there we were got the experience of provider, as well as with some of the leading institutions. We got chance to work on from the API provider side and from the consumer side as well. So we have got the gist of from the both of the sides. And if you see the power which API holds is it's too natural what it can be, right? So it's nothing new in API as such. If you ask, I mean, likewise, API was been there since ages. It's just the form of the API is getting changes. As I mentioned earlier as well, in my experiences, earlier APIs were largely was driven or understood by the technology teams only, but it is now beyond that. So that is something which has been changed so far. So going forward, so few of our training services where which are largely also focused on the APIs as well, because open banking, digital banking, or any of the digital services, if you see, would be nothing if you don't have the APIs in the background to run this all the show. I mean the backend services in the sense. Yeah, so we bring the I mean value proposition from our side will be largely from the thought leadership, the practitioner approach, because largely as I mentioned, we have worked on it. I mean we have had hands-on experiences on the practices which we do, so that gives us a leeway to have a practitioner approach, and we do also convey a deep engagement with our partners. And yeah, I mean, just to mention about the network, a lot of you guys from the participant I can see, which were part of our BFS, so Bharat Med Tech Summit. So that is something another event which runs with us as a part of our networking initiatives. Yeah. So going forward into the subject, we'll start with understanding of API. So I would just request Sumit to add some points on it, which will help us to move further about what is API means. This is just for the understanding of the peers who may not be aware about what the basic API means.
Thank you, Vikrant. So, majorly, I believe most of all of you will be knowing about what is an API. But for a brief, I'll just give a gist about it. We all know what API stand for. It's an application programming interface. It's a bridge between various software and as well as interface where they communicate between two self. As well as giving a classic example, we can take an example of waitress, where a customer who wants to put some order some menu. So what they do, they take the order, they go to their chef, and once it's prepared, it is given back to the customer itself. So here we get the understand what are the request response protocol are. So API works in the same similar fashion, where the request has been made one from the one application or the server, but maybe it's from the customer end, and it is received at the server, and it has been processed and respond back. So that's how the whole API system work. And we'll moving toward the next slide. Yeah. So in most of the cases, like the API providers that we also engaged with in the past, as we have helped them into the various processes and services, be it lending services, be it payment service, banking service, credit card service, remittance as a service, insurance as a service, wealth as a service, travel as a service, and other services as well. So we have engaged with the various customers, be it on the bank side, being in the technological provider side. We are helping them into this whole process, and we have also evaluated the whole benchmarking piece. So I request Vikrant to take it forward.
Yeah, thanks, Sumit. Just wanted to add on top of that, like if we see, if, as I mentioned earlier as well, the API has been one of the forefront of any system. So any system which interact with each other would have some interface in between. So that is which is called as a API. So earlier it was when largely it was like the methods which we use, or I mean the people who has background from the tech side would be able to relate it to me that how it was a bit difficult to match up those interfaces at that point of time. And with growing the technology standardization, now we have got the sort of REST and SOAP based APIs, which are a bit easier to understand. On top of that, the orchestration has also come into the picture, which is amalgamation of multiple APIs and creating workflows. So that has also improved a lot. So going forward, we'll just like to highlight a few things like what should be the organization's focus areas in terms of how this API banking initiative can be managed from their side. Meanwhile, I would just request that we would also run a poll right now and request all of you to put your responses on that. Yeah, so the poll, the question is related to that how the, understanding of API frameworks is essential for which of the teams out of this, right? It can be whether it is for the business teams only or the product team or tech team, or is it for the both? Yeah, because the things have got a lot of change, right? If you see, it is earlier, as as I was mentioning as well, it was more from the tech oriented, and many of the people were not much been able to relate it to the what you can say the language which has been used, or the concept of the API itself, which has been simplified a lot. And thank you everyone for joining this thought as well. That I could see that the everyone is agreeing that it has been important from the both sides. I mean, as for the product as well as for the tech. So that quite of simplifies this focus areas as well. As we are saying, these are the five key focus areas which we think. I mean, it's not limited to this one, but these are the major ones we should be the focus areas of any organization who wants to start their journey into the open banking or the API banking per se. We'll go deep into each one of them. Likewise, when we say the product and the journeys. So the journey here means the customer journeys. So whenever the API designing happens, the API should be designed in a way that end users and end user will should be in the mind. So that if I'm creating a API for any internal application, the appearance of API might be different, and if I'm doing it for the external party, the appearance might be different. For example, it would be going from the simplicity of the type of the documentation you're creating, the type of the parameters you are accepting. So those all things can be different apart from the security practices which you follow, which largely has to be similar. The intent is to have same security practices for internal as well as for external consumers. But if I want to say like from the product perspective, the end product should be in the mind of the developer who is working on the design of the API. So that simplifies a lot of things. So microservices is one of that aspect. Like likewise, as soon as you are seeing in the market, the microservices have been one of the popular mechanism which has been used to develop the APIs. So that allows you to have a flexibility in using the APIs and amalgamating that APIs into the one service, creating the workflow orchestration, also what we call that. That becomes very much easier with that. So whenever the API design is being done, Since then, the product and journey perspective should be taken into the consideration. Yeah. So, as I was saying, the flexible and adaptable API has to be adaptable to incorporate new features as well. It should also be efficient in the interaction. So, likewise, the latency period or accessing and utilizing services which have been provided should have the minimum friction as such. Yeah, from the architecture side, organizational architecture has to be scalable and adaptable. Say, for example, the very relatable example you can see of the UPI. UPI application today is built full of the APIs behind it. I mean, there is no communication in the UPI systems largely, which is which is outside the API interfaces. Since if you ask this question about 2015-16 when just UPI was launched, the scenario was different, right? And if you see the a year or two down the line, the adoption have been immensely high. I mean, today, if you see largely for each of the transactions which you do in your day-to-day life, also you use the UPI as your one of the favorite app, and there the communication which is happening beyond behind that each of the transaction is been supported by all the APIs all the way. So that is where the architecture support becomes very much important. That API management platform should have be properly configured and should also allow to have efficient integration between the system. The architecture overall should be a microservices based architecture, which allows you to utilize multiple services at multiple point of time. I mean, as per the use cases, you can tweak on the microservices and use it accordingly. So that also gives you support to scale as well as to have the simplification into the management of APIs. The virtualization and containerization also helps a lot. I mean, considering the today's scenarios where the things are changing rapidly, right? So there, if you do not have containerization, it becomes very much difficult to have the continuous implementation and continuous deployment of the scenarios. So that is where it becomes very much important to have the proper virtualization exist, which will allow you to scale, and proper containerization, which will allow you to continue the business in all the scenarios. Yeah, from the tech perspective, I would say that technological advancement should have been adopted, like AI, ML, where cloud technologies. So cloud allows you to have flexibility as well as the scalability also can be achieved through cloud. So that is something which you can consider as a consider it as a simplistic example to have the scalability and flexibility into the system. The data collection methodologies, that now this becomes a very important part of it, like the data collection processes which are involved into the AI system, that involves a lot of diverse data coming from diverse origins, the API logs, network traffic, historical data set that helps you to analyze the responses of APIs which are going, and if there are any delays or if there is any friction which has been involved into it, that can be simplified. Likely in earlier days, this was not been considered as maybe a larger component asset for the detail monitoring, but considering today's uses of API and the business dependency on it, it becomes very much crucial to have control on that. Yeah, as I was mentioning, the performance become a very important part here. So performance optimization should have been considered into it. Like the speed at which APIs are responding, that becomes very much important. Now just consider a scenario when you are doing, say, suppose for example, you are doing account opening process on online, and incidentally in the backend, if any API call fails, it gets back to you for the new process again and again, which becomes very much cumbersome at the at some point of time, or rather for every time for the user who is using those services. So that is where the monitoring becomes very much important. The API calls which are been successful, or how much APIs are getting failed, so that monitoring also helps a lot. Likewise, So whenever you are giving, you are exposing APIs to the outside world, if you do not have control on the success rate of APIs, the partner may get discouraged to use those APIs. We know a lot of instances where we see the options of transaction becomes lesser and lesser. Say, for example, if I'm booking a ticket somewhere, I can see there are multiple gateways which have been shown out there, which I can select one of them and then go ahead. And at some point of time, you will see very limited option, or you see the error message stating that the host which you are trying to connect is not available as of now. So those scenarios can be maintained with the properly maintained with the monitoring. The number of requests API can handle at a time, that becomes very much important, considering that the scenarios which are there today, the concurrent transaction mapping, or you can say the concurrent request mapping, has to be done properly. So the clocking of APIs has to be done in such a way that you should have option to do the flexible scaling for the API. So that can be achieved through multiple technologies. But just for an instance, the performance benchmarking should be done in such a way that the adoption from the business side and the availability from the technology side has to be merged, and the assessment has to be done. So there are a lot of tools available like JMeter, etc., where you can perform this performance testing of the APIs and test each of the API. So many of the times what happened, the workflow has been tested, but individual APIs are not been tested. Say, for example, if in any of the workflow, there is a entry point of single API where customer comes and say, just for an example, enter his PAN number and the mobile number, and the journey started. So there is a API in the backend which calls this, which checks this mobile number via sending an OTP. Now, if I check the whole workflow, it might work. But if I say from the performance testing perspective, the number of transactions which are going to hit for the mobile number OTP check would definitely be higher. And after that, the drop would start. So if I say I'm clocked for the 100 TPS for the whole workflow, then for that particular API, I should expect at least 200 TPS. So that is something needs to be considered while doing this performance testing. So this can be different in a way. Say, for example, when I do the benchmarking, say for transactions basis, if I'm doing it maybe for RTGS, NFT type of transaction, it can be different. If I'm doing for the transaction like UPI, it has to be different because the adoption is like that. So there has to be a matrix which you can consider with your business, considering that what the adoption would be and what the APIs which you are providing. But just suggestion is, whenever this performance testing is done or matrix has been designed, please get involved with all the stakeholders and do this assessment of how many API adoption or consumption has been requested, expected, and according to that, this design has to be done. So I would not say that there is a fixed formula for it or fixed number for it, because it depends on the way the integrations, the system, the offerings has been designed. Say, for example, if I just want to take a simple example like fixed deposit account opening API. Now, I may say that 100 TPS is quite good enough, but now business is running some campaign which is saying that the for next 2 days the interest rate would be say 8.5. Just for argument's sake, I'm saying it's 8.5, which is above the above say 0.5 percent than the usual ones. In that scenario, you might get the more number of requests during this period. So the performance has to be re-monitored or reconsidered every time whenever the new functionality or new campaign been run. So the answer to one of the questions which I picked up from here, like what is ideal, what will be the ideal performance benchmarking criteria? So there is no ideal benchmarking criteria as such, but yes, the what should be considered into benchmarking is the business perspective, the duration for which this benchmarking is done, and in case if there any new changes or any new functionality is being introduced, you have to revisit this one. So for transaction basis, I mean, for the APIs which are supporting the transaction, it definitely has to be higher. And if I talk about the transactions which are or the APIs which are supporting the only the experience layer, it can be much higher than that, because there is no processing involved as such. If there are any APIs which are performing longer operations other than transactions, it might be dependent on the use case. So ideally, use case to use case is different. So there is no silver bullet as such for this. Just to pick up another question, how do we define the microservices? So microservices are the simply, if I would say that the microservices are been built in such a way that whenever you will have multiple services or multiple, you can say the functionalities has to be covered in one API. So you can split it into the multiple microservices. What it helps is you can have these microservices written in different languages, written in different, say, suppose containers as well. And it gives you the flexibility to have same function done into the multiple short services, and each service has been defined separately. Say for example, a simple example, if I want to take say just to extend the earlier example, for doing the transaction, so there is one single API which does the transaction. So this can be splitted into the multiple parts. So there will be one transaction to get the remitter information, one transaction to check the beneficiary information, another API just to check the beneficiary information is registered or not, etc., etc. So when you build these services into the micro component, it gives you flexibility to manage those micro components separately. So if I want to change or tweak something in one of the micro component, I do not need to touch whole workflow. I can change only that micro component, which gives me flexibility to adapt to the changes fastly. Yeah, so partner experience again, it becomes very crucial because I mean, whenever be it on the consumer side or be it on the API provider side, the partner experience becomes very much important out there. The onboarding process has to be easy. So when we say the easy onboarding process, doesn't mean you have to skip through any of the you can say audit or security related concerns, but it's just that the onboarding should be easier for the for the partner. I mean, partner should know what are the steps he's going through be until the going live. So a lot of the times, if you have observed by any chance the developer portal of the banks, many of the banks have done this upfront. Like there they will give you whole process that how the steps are going to be. I mean, starting from the onboarding to the sandbox of the developer portal, and then going to the next stage of the discussion where you will have the deep integration with the bank, and then onto the UAT service, then on the production, then onto the pilot launch, and then to the go live. So those are the steps which have been banks have been defining. So that is something which becomes very much important for the partner to understand that what the journey of that partner would be when they integrate with you. So from the channel perspective, many of the developer communities as well as direct assistance to resolve the integration related challenges has to be supported. So as you many of you might be aware that the developer whenever they do this exploration of APIs, they largely try to see that if they can use these services like developer communities where they can put in their questions, and they can get it answered through other community members as well who have been experienced into it. So that also helps a lot. So that sort of community or the support services should be there. So I wouldn't take the name, but one of the bank where we were just exploring the services where we register ourselves into the developer portal, and there was a response from the bank itself, right, stating that we have seen that you have been registered to our developer portal and exploring few of the services. I mean, can we help you to explore any of the services? And the guy was so kind that he also offered a help from his manager. He stated that if I cannot answer the question, I can escalate it to the manager and get him for the help as well. So that gives a very different perspective for the partner when you are observing this. So that and definitely helps a lot to get the you can say get the response from the partner how they are feeling about being on the platform, and that also keeps engaged as well. So also response times and reliability also becomes very much important. To state that response times and reliability into the each API becomes very much important, because at certain stages we think that the other person, I mean the partner as such, who is going to use those API would be aware about the backend processes, but usually it doesn't happen because it's the API which is they are going to integrate. So they may not know the complexity in the backend. So it would be great if the partner itself defines that this is the API and standard response time for this API should be this and this. That helps the other partner who is on the consumer side to design the application, and also it gives the assurance to them stating that the APIs which I'm going to use in the sandbox are going to work in the similar way in the production. Because I mean, many of you might know about this sandbox terminology as such, but just for the benefit sake, sandbox is the environment which has been created by the API service provider to release it to the external parties with standard request and response. So there is no business logic behind it. There will be standard request or response. So anything you put on sandbox, it will work. I mean, when it goes beyond that stage, you might have challenges. So that is how the sandbox is. So it becomes very much important to define the expected RT, I mean response times in the API design itself or the API documentation itself. So that also gives the next point to it, like all the APIs which have been there, those has to be available on the sandbox as well. So there are certain different types of API. I can say that the API provider might have. So there can be public APIs. Few of them will be the private APIs. Few of them again will be the sort of exclusive APIs for a particular partner which have been customized. So at least public APIs should be there. Private APIs definitely would not be on the sandbox, because that would be for the internal purpose, and the specific to the partner APIs. So that can be explored while doing the discussions with the partner as well after the sandbox stage. So all the public APIs which are available, which can be consumed by the partner, should be available, and at with some access level, you can say tailgates or the some gating boundaries, you can have multiple set of APIs as well. Yeah, with this, we'll move forward for the how does API benchmarking will help for organization to get into this part. But before that, I would just like to, I mean, put the feedback out here. So request all you to go through this feedback, and please share your feedback, so it will help us as well to improve on our content on the delivery side. Meanwhile, I'll check if there are any questions which I can pick it up. Yeah. So there was one question from the microservices side, that what is a microservice? So I think we spoke about it. There was on the performance benchmarking as well. So yeah, so there is no ideal performance benchmarking criteria as such. It depends on use case basis. But if I can get a few more details, we can connect on the LinkedIn or somewhere where we can share me the few more details which I would require, which will help me as well to answer this. So the question is, are there any usually rate limits or throttling mechanisms in place for the API users? So from that perspective, right, so rate limits can be defined. I mean, it depends again on the provider. So like maybe if I want to say like, is there any standard answer to it? So there is no standard answer to it. It depends. Usually what happens is the information related APIs which have been there, those would have the I mean rate limits as such. But apart from that, it depends on the use case to use case basis. So there has been question on the risk in the API integration and what are the mitigates to avoid those risks as such. So from the risk perspective in API integration, largely if you will see the API, I mean the risk as such. So there are multiple risks which have been there. If I would say to mitigate those risks, what you need to consider is like you should have a proper what can I say um, proper gate logs for each of the services which you are providing. Unless you have that, it becomes very difficult to manage those risks. So definite risk would be on the cyber security side. So if you do not have a proper encryption mechanism which has been used for those APIs and which are been used by the which have been pushed by the both of the ends from the provider side, from the issuer side as well. Simplistic answer would be to use two-way SSL certificate based off authentication or the AD based authentication, etc. So those can be used to mitigate those risks. Again, the risk would be from the accessing the APIs without the authorization. So to have authorization level on each of the API to check whether that partner has access to the I mean environment first, and after the environment to the each API and each function. So that becomes very much important. From the monetization perspective, the uses of API, where these APIs are being used, so that has to be also been verified and checked. So repetitive, you can say audits or the verification of the audit reports of the API consumer would be helpful there. So these are the few ones which are in the top of my mind. And from the reputation perspective, definitely where this API has been projected as such. I mean, if you see the institutions have been very much particular about it that wherever you are using the API set, it has to be mentioned as a powered by, and the clear uses of that API has to be stated in while establishing the relationship for the production. So largely these things can be managed on the API side as well as on the framework on the agreement which has been done between the both of the partner. So, from the value proposition perspective, yeah, definitely it gives the competitive edge. I mean, every last person wants to become first, and every first person wants to be on the first all the time. So that is where the competitive edge becomes very much important. So API benchmarking will help you to build your APIs in such a way that at any point of time this the position would be the spearheaded position than others. So that competitive edge is one of the value proposition of benchmarking exercise. From the operational excellence is like when you do benchmarking, you get to know about what are the flaws which are there into the system where the improvement can be done. So that's something which helps to improve on the operational excellence as well. Enhance experience, it will give you help you to identify the efficient and responsive services for the customer and for the end user, because to take the view from the outside it becomes very much important that how you want to enhance this experience. And definitely on the innovation side, because always the market goes into the different directions than you can imagine, so it always better to have a third party view who can bring in the best things which are happening into the market, or the view of the individual countrywide or the global view as well, which help you to gauge that is there any innovative use cases can be built on top of that. Yeah, I would like to just talk about how do we approach for this, and what is this assessment, what is the API assessment framework that we follow. So we go ahead with three stages. First becomes the current state assessment, market assessment, and benchmarking. And third becomes a recommendation and report development. So first one is largely talks about the understanding the current scenario which is there, which largely talks about the understanding the current organization architecture, current business processes and strategies, because it becomes very important to understand the what is their setup currently, because beyond without that having any view on any of the any recommendation on any of the component will become very much irrelevant for the organization. So that's where we try to understand the current current organization architecture which has been followed. Also on the market practices, which are the best market practices followed into the industry. That gives the understanding of the where the market is standing today and what are the practices are being followed out there. From the insights and gap perspective, we try to identify the gap in the practices of the organization. Of course, that involves a lot of study from the market and the research and definitely the experience where we have worked on earlier or the way we have been practicing with other peers today. So that brings to us for the putting this all the learnings into the framework, evaluation framework, which we have designed at our end, which largely talks about the each detailing of each of the APIs and each of the services what an organization has, considering the partnership what they can have, and that actually framework gives understanding or breaks down into the organization level parameters, API level parameters, and market level parameters. So what would be the organization parameters is organization level if it is a API provider company. In that sense, API provider organization, for such API organization, it becomes important to have a proper portal access experience. We have seen multiple scenarios where the developer portal access itself becomes difficult. So in such scenario, this may not attract the partners as such, because there are two ways, maybe I can say, where this API can be consumed. One will be where the product is too unique product and which has been required by everyone, and other will be it's a competitive product. So in that sense, whenever it is a competitive product, which largely the situation would be, you should have the experience, partner experience, base partner experience, what you can have on the ground. So as we discussed earlier as well, to have a proper experience for the partner becomes very much important. The navigation and the user interface experience onto the developer portal, and becomes a very much important part is the API catalog. How this catalog of the API has been maintained. Say for example, someone would say we have 300 APIs which will provide you XYZ services. But these XYZ services are from the multiple direction. In that case, that may not help. So if you have proper segregation of that APIs, the proper catalog is maintained for those APIs, and the consolidation has been done in proper way. Where say suppose if I click on one workflow of the API, I will get the list of 10 APIs that has to be followed under that. Maybe just to give you more detailed understanding on it, say suppose I will have a tab of you can say loan account opening API. So when I click on loan account API, all the services which are related to loan account opening should be listed out there. So that will simplify the process for the partner to understand under the say loan account API, these are the 10-15 services which I will have to consume. Otherwise, what happens is typically you go into the developer portal, you search with the loan account, you get only 5 APIs out there. So the partner gets the understanding that, okay, this 5 APIs only needs to be integrated, and the rest of the journey can be completed with this. So that can be simplified. So that gives a very simplistic way for the user, and also the you can say better transparency and clarity for the partner as well. So this API consolidation has to be one of the key point to keep the partner engaged out there. On the API level, now it goes into the one deep level of the APIs, like API documentation, format, and flowchart has to be clear. Likewise, many of the times it happens that you might have also been seen. Okay, it's not that difficult to understand the API documentation because largely it has been written in the English language. Apart from that, it is relatable. When you start reading it, if you have basic understanding of the workflow, you will be able to relate it. It's not that difficult. I would just request everyone to have a look at any API documentation as such, which is related to your background, that definitely will help you to understand how it works. But what I can see in the market today is like there are very less people who have understood this very correctly and written down the API documentation, which clarify each step. Starting from the parameters, rather starting from the purpose of the API. For what purpose this API has been written, what are the points this API is going to cover, API wants to cover rather. What are the parameters which have been there? So again, into the parameter, you will have mandatory parameter, non-mandatory parameters, right? And explanation for each of the parameter. Also, at certain point of time, there are formats which are defined for the each field. So that also has to be clarified there. Maybe the error messages always in API documentation, you will see there will be standard error messages for all, which may not be helpful for the partner to understand. So there has to be separation for the business errors and the technological errors. So which largely called as a business declines and technical declines. So that segregation should be there in the documentation. So holistically, if I want to see like how that document should look like, it should look like the clear understanding of the purpose, the set of APIs which are involved along with that particular API service which been documented, as well as the clarification on each of the parameter of that API and the use case of the API, as well as the error messages, what should be the next action on the success, which API should be called in after which response, that proper flow chart should be there. So it's bit of the hard work for the one time, but it helps everyone whenever anyone wants to refer it to the use this API. So yeah, so that is something from the documentation and flowchart and format side. From the sandbox side, there has to be a sandbox testing environment. As I was mentioning earlier, at least the public API should be accessible over that, and the use cases which can be built. So at certain level, you may not be able to expose all the APIs, but you can at least showcase the use case, which will help the partner to understand that this particular API provider is ready and equipped with the set of APIs which are required to build this use case. The security features has to be also there, mentioned out there. What are the security parameters, or what are the security standards you want the partner to adopt? So that something has to be mentioned out there. On the market side, we would want to deep dive into the bank architecture, comparing to the market level. So, what is the current industry bank architecture or any organization architecture has been followed? What is the experience from the client, that is from the partner? What if there are any feedbacks from them, and any security features which have been provided into the market, which are new to the organization and can be implemented to improvise upon. So these are the few parameters which we pick up, and yeah, it's just a detailing of each of the parameter, how the format would look like, and this will be some of the templates which we use to do that. Yeah. So this is how the basically templatization has been done. So that gives us on the basis on the recommendations would be largely talking about the how the architecture should be, what improvements which have been needed into the architecture. Are there any needs to introduce any of the new system or integrations? So that is something which is mentioned on the architecture level. On the developer portal level, how the API catalog should be, what are the different services has to be consolidated under which services, which are the services has to be there on the developer portal, which should not be there. How the journey should be, as I was mentioning, the journey has to be simplified for the partner to onboard and start using the APIs. So that is something which we deep dive into. On the API level, largely I talked about what are the points we try to cover out there. So performance, largely we have the suggestions for the performance and considering the market standard for the use case particularly, because as I mentioned earlier as well, there will not be a benchmark as such for all the APIs, but certain API use cases would be there for which the certain you can say the performance level has been accepted into the market. So that is something we'll try to give some understanding on top of that. what should be the potential partnership that you should look out for? What are the different, you can say, steps you can consider to increase your simplicity on the integration as well as scalability, and the final report, which is a amalgamation of all these points. So with this, I will just request Sumit to give a spend few minutes on talking about how we have done that. Prior to that, I would also request to have another poll from your side to understand whether this benchmarking, how do you see this benchmarking helping for you?
Thank you, Vikrant.
Yeah, thank you. Able to see responses from all of you, and largely the responses towards was having the API benchmarking has been valuable for optimizing your organization APIs uses. And for those who think it's not, I mean, although that is only one few of the 10% of them, but would like to know from you guys at some point of time, and we can connect on the LinkedIn or somewhere, but we would like to understand what is the gap which you see that the why this API benchmarking tool may not be useful for your organization. Yeah, with this, I just hand over to yeah, sorry. With this, I will just hand over to Sumit to go through the case study.
Thank you so much. So, moving towards the case study, that one of like this was for the leading PSU bank, where the aim was to improve the whole developer portal, the existing developer portal, and to benchmark against various competitors in the market itself. So our primary goal was to have a deep understanding as well as market research within the market and evaluate those features. Majorly, it was on the corporate API banking side, not on the retail side. So what we did, we evaluated the three of the leading banks in the market, and we benchmark it against the whole process. So as you can see, the objective was to understand the current, as we are already discussing how the whole digital fifth approach would be, is to understand the current architecture. So we tried to understand the whole current architecture with the leading stakeholders within the PSU bank. And once we got some insight about the architecture, we started parallelly working on the competitors analysis, where we did some market research, where we understand the whole developer portal experience. And similarly, we tried to connecting with the various market leaders within the corporate API banking infrastructure, where we gain some insight how it should look like. And apart from that, as we were given the whole suggestion based on the integration as well as scalability and on the security practice as well. So as you can see, there were major teams involved, be it on the product side, be it on the technology side, business side. Majorly, the concern was from the business side, how their developer portal should look like, what are the enhancements should be increased, and how they can approach to the newer partner, be it on the what we have already discussed on a lending as a service, payment as a service, and as well as there are development team involved. With the help of all these team members, we gave a document where we have gave some suggestion as well as we have understand the whole gap analysis. And during this whole process, we were able to identify 190s APIs, corporate APIs from the competitors, and we analyze on various factors. If you'll consider the factors like what are the number of parameters for the each APIs are, how the TAT of those APIs are, what are the TPS of the whole system itself. So this was something that we studied and we put in forth with the whole document, and we recommended the same to our PSU bank. As well as we have understand the whole architecture, and we studied the limitation of this architecture, and we suggested some improvement on the architecture with the some of the industry connects itself. So this was something that we did very recently with one of the PSU bank. And yeah, that was a really experiential project for us, as well as we were able to deploy it very. progressively.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Sumit. So, maybe I'll pick up the few questions which are there in the background. Like, what are the, are there any APIs which have been stated by the government or ID notices or income tax? There have been different API services which have been shared. I mean, India Stack, what largely we talk about is wholly built on the set of APIs. Apart from that, the specific like about the IT notices or the amendments is something I need to check and come back to you. So since the name is not mentioned here, so you can connect with me on the LinkedIn. Let me gather some information about it and get back to you on that. From the perspective, like there have been question like what are the how you can secure the sensitive data while transmitting through the API. So there are multiple security mechanisms that can be used as as I was mentioning earlier as well. The dual SSL certification, there can be methodologies like dual encryption can be used where the data is encrypted as well as the payload. The specific data set, the whole API request is encrypted. Out of that, the specific data set which you think, which you know that that is very sensitive data and you cannot put it as it is. So that can be tokenized. It can be encrypted with another private key, which has been shared with on specifically with that partner, or can be stored into the HSM, which is also called as a hardware security model, where you will generate the offset of that value, and only that is to be passed on to, into the API. So there are the multiple ways with which you can do that. If you have the better understanding on the use case, you can pick up the one which is most suitable for the use case. There can be hardest of hard encryption that you can do. Maybe something like hashing also can be used there, or tokenization also can be used there. And as I mentioned earlier, the dual encryption methodology also can be used. There was a question like, are there any regulatory direction from the regulator side on the NBFCs for API? So, from the IT security or the standards of the APIs which has to be considered is something which I'm known for. Specific to NBFC, again, I may not be aware at this point of time. So, maybe I'll pick it up and respond back to you. Yeah, so due to the time constraint, we couldn't take the question answer sessions online, but me, Sumit, both of us are reachable on the LinkedIn, so we can have connect at any point of time. And also the people who are sharing the feedback would like to also have a conversation with them, so we'll connect back to you as well. If there is any specific feedback, I would just request you to mention into the feedback form as well, which will help us to improve, as well as if there is something which we can help along with, there will come back to you on that part as well. So yeah, that's it from our side. So thank you very much for being here, and looking forward to have some interaction, offline interaction with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.